Good afternoon. I'm Jessica Stoner, and welcome to History Nebraska's Brown Bag Lecture Series. Thanks to the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation, whose financial support allows us to tape and broadcast these programs across the state. Also thanks to LNK TV for producing these programs. Today's lecture is Grace Crandall Richardson, Nebraska's Persistent Suffragist, presented by Dr. Amy Forss, Subject Chair of Metropolitan Community College's History Program in Omaha. Her first book, Black Print with a White Carnation, focused on Mildred Brown and the Omaha Star newspaper, while her second text, Newspapers and Butter Pecan Ice Cream, was an illustrated children's version of her first book. Her third book, Borrowing from Our Foremothers, is under contract with the University of Nebraska Press and has a publishing date of spring 2020. Please feel free to ask Dr. Amy questions at any point during the presentation. And let's welcome Dr. Forss.
Good afternoon. How's everybody? I'm still drying out. Yeah. First of all, thank you for even coming. I was looking at the weather this morning and I thought, there's no way nobody's going to come. But thanks for getting out your canoes and coming. I do want to say thank you very much to Laura Mooney, who is standing back there, who is the head curator at History Nebraska, and she helped me get this lovely wedding dress of Grace Crandall Richardson's. I was given this borrowed outfit from her granddaughter, Nene Richardson Hart. She is in her late 80s, and when I was able to get a hold of her, she said, wait a minute, I've got something for your lecture. And she said, you can't keep it, but you can borrow it. So there it is. Also in the PowerPoint, I have some images that Nene has provided. I also have images from Grace's 4 scrapbooks. And then I have some images from History Nebraska, which are noted as well. So thank you to Laura very much for helping me with this. And also to Andrea Bunny Falling. She just retired after 30 years at History Nebraska in the archives. And she spent many, many happy hours trying to help me with various projects. And of course, Nene Richardson Hart. There's a few portions of what I'm going to talk about today that are in my upcoming book, Borrowing from Our Foremothers. But for the most part, all of this is brand new, and so you'll be hearing it, I'll be hearing it for the first time today, so I'm pretty excited about that. Without further ado, I want to go ahead and give you a little bit of contextualization about Grace Crandall Richardson to kind of explain what she did for Nebraskan women and why I'm calling her the persistent suffragist. 22 years before Grace Crandall Richardson was born, Nebraska began its women's suffrage campaign. It began the day Council Bluffs resident Amelia Bloomer, the one didn't create it but gets the credit for the Bloomer suit, stepped in front of Omaha's Douglas Hotel. It was July 4th, 1855. Apparently, Bloomer's lengthy Votes for Women discourse outside of the fairly new territorial capital, that was actually Omaha at this point, made quite an impression because the following year, Omaha legislators put suffrage to a vote. Republican General William Larimore, a recent transplant from Pennsylvania, was the person behind this radical measure. Conservative Bourbon Democrat leaders like Arbor Day creator J. Sterling Morton soundly defeated it. Larimore's anti-suffrage colleagues took great delight in taunting him with a consolation prize. They gave him a petticoat. Nebraska women, and for that matter, women throughout America, respectfully postponed the suffrage question until after the Civil War ended in 1865. But once Nebraska gained their statehood and changed the name of Lancaster to Lincoln and made it the state capital in 1867, women residents were granted school suffrage rights. But full suffrage, the right to vote in public elections, would elude them. Nothing, not even Susan B. Anthony coming to Nebraska more than once giving speeches, not residents of Hebron, Nebraska, founding the Nebraska Women's Suffrage Association, and certainly not 39 suffrage chapters holding a statewide convention in Kearney, Nebraska, made a whit of difference. The Omaha Daily Bee denounced the suffrage seekers as agitators, and they wondered if they were asking for something that they should not have. The Omaha Herald, they're not the World Herald yet, the Omaha Herald jeered at the American Women's Suffrage Association and its rival, the National Women's Suffrage Association, for holding both of their national organizations' conferences in Omaha. Suffragists, according to the newspaper, were a species of lunacy. Nebraska legislative proposals for women's suffrage were repeatedly defeated in 1889, 1891, 1893, 1897, and 1909. That just makes me tired even going through all those. I can't even imagine how these suffragists were feeling at this point. They're very frustrated. So, in 1912, the modern-day successful Nebraska suffragist movement began, in part due to the subject of today's brown bag lecture, Grace Crandall Richardson. I almost feel like we have her here today in spirit because her dress is there. And she and I were the exact same height, so I have to chuckle that she's like monitoring this. Grace Crandall Richardson was the eldest child of Frank and Nellie Richardson. Let me see if I can get this to advance. Hi-ya. Oh, good. You can all see that? I was trying to bloat it up as much as I could. Anyway, Grace was the eldest child of Frank and Nellie Crandall. She was born in 1877 in Worthington, Minnesota. Her childhood name, there we go, was Gracie. And you can just see it on the side of this. It looks like a real photo, which is a type of photograph, kind of postcard of the time. Her brother, named Harry, arrived in 1879, and her sister Laura came in 1887. Now, what happens afterwards gets really complicated. I was talking with Nina Richardson Hart. This is Grace Crandall Richardson's granddaughter, and she explained to me that her grandmother really didn't talk about her past very much, but she did mention one time that her parents were killed in a robbery. They were in their carriage, you know, not quite stagecoach, but kind of like an open sleigh carriage. And they were out late at night. None of the kids were with them, and someone robbed them and murdered them. So it becomes really complicated because I have looked through a lot of old newspapers and I've been unable to document this. But I do know that the Omaha Daily Bee mentioned the Crandall family in early 1902. So sometime between the birth of Laura in 1887 and then moving to Omaha in somewhere, maybe the 1890s, I'm unsure, this is when the murder took place. For sure, we do know that Grace Crandall graduated from Omaha High School, which today is Central High School, and she was class of 00. I know, that sounds odd, but yeah, it was 1900. She was 22, which is kind of an old age for that time period, but I'm guessing with the murders, something was set back, and maybe this is why she wasn't telling her granddaughter about a very delicate past. Shortly before her 25th birthday, she would become the bride of James Richardson on October 1st, 1902. And I love this picture. This is James Richardson's family's drugstore. It's called the Richardson Drug. It's in Omaha. They also had their headquarters were in St. Louis. And James, the reason why he was in Omaha was because he was to open this branch. And you can just see him. He's right above the placard. It says JAS, James. And he's just sitting there. I don't know how well you can see this image. But he made quite the impression on Grace. Unfortunately, his family, who were extremely well-to-do, were societally disappointed with Grace. I don't know if they said it to her face, but they basically told James, "You have married beneath you. We're not happy." So, wearing the same dress that she wore at graduation, and there it is right here, she wore this dress to her wedding. She had also worn it to prom as well. I don't think she was kind of a proud young woman, and I don't think she appreciated that they were looking down on her. So she's going to marry James anyway. And she married him. This is an image, maybe. Hang on a minute. I have some nice extra details here. She married him in this dress. You can see the size of her. She's quite tiny. The details are just incredible. Laura and I had a lot of fun. There's just a few buttons and they're wooden, but most of this are hook and eye. So I can't even imagine getting into this thing without a couple of ladies' maids. So there she is in her graduation dress / wedding dress. And she is going to marry James in this house. This is 2433 Manderson. This is in Omaha, Nebraska. Today, I went ahead and Google Earthed it. There's just this empty lot. There is no house, unfortunately. But she's going to marry him in this house. And at the end of the ceremony, her very wealthy husband put a 2-carat diamond ring on her finger. And as soon as the ceremony was over, she took it off. And she said, "I'm not going to wear this again." It was her first act of persistence. I'm making a point here, not resistance. Regardless of the ring's beauty, Mrs. James Richardson, or Grace as she preferred in private, persisted in not wearing it. The ring will remain in its jewelry box throughout their marriage, and after her husband passes in 1930, for the rest of her life in 1963 is when she passed, except for one brief period, which I will discuss at the end of the presentation because I have an image that I want to show you that when I saw it, I was just really excited about. So, while Grace Richardson's personal life is somewhat shrouded in mystery, she journaled her public activism and that of her fellow Nebraska suffragists very, very minutely from the years 1912 to 1920. And here we go. These are 4 scrapbooks that Grace put together. And they're pretty oversized volumes. They are so overstuffed. You know how this goes when you make an album and you can't close the cover? It's like a bad suitcase that you're sitting on top of. So the tops, the front pieces of the albums have ripped off, unfortunately, but there's still stuff full of goodies. I wanted to show you what she named these. And yeah, it just made me chuckle. This is a woman who has few words but knows exactly how to get her point across. Book 1, Stuff. That works. Book 2, Conventions, State, National. Book 3, The Case. And Book 4, Photos. Very practical. So this is basically the focus of today's lecture. Now, Richardson is going to donate these artifact-filled albums to the Nebraska State Historical Society in 1950. And the occasion in 1950 was the 30th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. So the volumes, they provide a superb source of Nebraska women's suffrage history, but they also demonstrated Richardson's suffragist persistence at its finest. So, Grace Richardson, her Omaha suffragist story begins in 1912. She is determined to bring votes to women to the tree planter state. We're now the Cornhuskers. That's what we used to be. The Nebraska Women's Suffrage Association is going to reorganize its offices from the state level down to the local level. So organization administrators are paying particular attention, you can see it on here on the map, on those county lines. And of course, we've got Lincoln is the 1st congressional district and Omaha is the 2nd congressional district. And Grace is going to be, I'm not sure if she was nominated or she was elected, that's kind of vague, but she will be in charge. She is the chairwoman of the Omaha district. Omaha and Lincoln, of course, will be serving as the headquarters, and then all the other districts, they just kind of feed into what the suffragists are doing. So Richardson, here she is. She's a wife of James, and by this time she is a mother to their only child, James Jr., and he is 6 years old in 1912. Her district is going to be serving Douglas, Washington, and Sarpy counties. So this is a very busy woman. Richardson is going to conduct state suffragist activities with Catherine, Katie, Mrs. H.C., that's what she usually goes by, Sumney. She's the Omaha Suffrage Board member, and also Suffrage Association President Mrs. Draper Smith. This is a lady that Richardson describes as never angry, never vindictive, or small. The intellectual upper middle class trio will eventually be called the Big Three. And they are going to supervise circulating a Nebraska Initiative petition drive in 1914. Their goal is to propose a state amendment to the Nebraska Constitution for women to have the right to vote. So energized after attending her first Nassau Convention in Nashville, Tennessee, Richardson, there we go. Oh, and there's the Big Three, in case you're wondering what they look like. I love this. I've got this is part of her scrapbook stuff. And then on the right-hand side, you can see it's a little bit clearer as to the Big Three. So Richardson is going to be very energized after her first convention in Nashville, Tennessee. You can see she kept all of her badges, and it's handwritten. People don't write like that anymore. And you've got her ribbon, her suffrage yellow ribbon, saying Nashville, Tennessee on it. So she is energized. She's going to wholeheartedly participate. She's role modeling persistent leadership to the other suffragists. And even in sub-zero 5-degree weather and blizzard conditions, they will solicit passerbyers in shops, factories, drugstores, grocery stores, office buildings, and their favorite, they call them maid meetings, men's labor unions, any of their meetings, because they're kind of captive audience. So overall, the county residents she interacts with are really pleasant. But Richardson can't understand why some people saw a suffragist as an object of scorn. And here's her documenting in her scrapbooks. And she also did an unpublished biography later on that she gave to Claremont College. She was wondering, were men ever considered objects of laughter when they were working for the franchise? She wondered. She had trouble fathoming why so many men, particularly pastors, were against women having the right to vote. What would they do in their church without women, she contemplated. When an anti-suffragist informed her that suffragists were all about free love, they tended poorly to their homes, and biologically they were unfit to vote, Richardson privately mused, but she didn't say it out loud, whatever that meant. Several of Nebraska Association male suffrage supporters, such as the owner of Kilpatrick's, which today that would have been Yonkers, that's what it became, they changed their stance because Nebraska Men's Association opposed to women's suffrage. They financially pressured their livelihoods. So some of the men in the community, some of the pastors, their congregants put some pressure on them and said, we're not going to go to your store unless you don't support suffrage. So the completed 1914 initiative petition ended up with 48,035 signatures, and it was the largest application filled in the state at that time. A silent photo play, that's one of those silent movies with kind of slides put together, of the suffragists presenting it to Nebraska Secretary of State, actually debuted at the Omaha Orpheum Theater. It was complemented by a 7-piece orchestra. Needing voter support throughout Nebraska for the suffrage proposal to be on the 1915 ballot, Richardson took the advice of Congresswoman Jeanette Rankin, who she'd actually met for a few minutes in Washington, D.C. The persistent suffragists asked local bank managers for lists of various small towns as prominent women. Surprisingly, since many of the banks were invested in brewery and distillation, I can almost get that word, You know what I mean? Yeah, whiskey. Okay. The Nebraska women's suffrage, they gave them the names anyway and said, here, go for it. So there's Grace and a group of women, and they are individually calling at these women at their homes, and they're asking them, when we do our open-air rallies, could you please come? Because it would be comforting to see kind of a familiar face in case we're being heckled. Speaking in public actually made Richardson anxious and ill. She preferred to just kind of be in the background and mingle with the crowd. It surprised the diminutive 5-foot-tall woman the impertinent questions that people asked her. Was she married? Did she have children? Who was going to make her family's dinner? She enjoyed their stunned looks when she explained, and this is one of these outdoor meetings, when she explained that being a suffragist was a full-time family affair. She did not dare mention that she had a maid who was making dinner. And then she pointed at her husband, James, and her little boy, James Jr., and she said, there they are. They're in the crowd. They're helping me. You know, her two men, they enjoyed talking with individuals. They even enjoyed singing, chanting various suffragist songs. And here's one. I thought this was a favorite. Nebraska, don't worry, I'm not going to sing it, but this was the Nebraska Yell, and they actually did get people like really excited about suffrage, and you actually know this one? Oh, okay. So yeah, they would be chanting this away. It's almost like going to a Husker game, but not quite. So receiving praise for her son's enthusiastic singing, Richardson said to someone in the crowd, well, he's very anxious that we obtain the ballot so that his mother will stay home and not be out campaigning for it. You know, her son was not always happy with his mother's devotion to the cause, but he was not neglected. Richardson explained to him that anytime somebody won the right to vote, it came after they had grown tired of the status quo. James Jr., known by his second cousin, Fonya Helm, as an astute judge of character even back in the day, digested this information, and he decided for Halloween that year that he would dress up as a suffragist. So there's James Jr. in the middle, and here's a shocker. The children around him, these are some, not the famous one, these are some of the siblings of Henry Fonda. These are the Fonda children who were their good friends. So it was just kind of odd that, yeah, they're in the picture, and they're dressed as suffragists too. It's kind of hard to tell. James really went all out with the bonnet. Richardson also questioned, was her husband, was he tired of untying and tying suffrage ribbons and pennants to their car? But he seemed to be okay with it. They'd even gone on a 3-month tour in the East campaigning for suffrage as a family. So Richardson's public activism is gradually going to expand. She's going to become a little bit more confident. And at a parade in Blair, Nebraska, this is July 11th, 1914, she not only distributed woman literature, but she also gave a short speech. Richardson, in her own words, was shy by nature, and according to her husband James, had a voice like an ingrowing whisper. The parade began with a smart-looking girl leading the procession on horseback. Suffragists were occasionally praised by the press. They always would say, oh, they look so nice. They have those nice long coats, and they're always buttoned up so well. And Richardson explained in her unpublished autobiography that a woman's clothes back in the day was made to order. And she said, well, suffragists, the reason why they never took their coats off was because their blouses were so worn that they couldn't. It would have been inappropriate. So apparently campaigning left little time to be fitted for new apparel. Following the Suffrage Herald on horseback came Mrs. Draper Smith's touring car, and they'd covered it with yellow chrysanthemums, and they outlined the words, vote for women's, that they had vote for women in purple asters. 12 girls who were dressed in all white rode in the car, and they were shading themselves with yellow and white umbrella. They were stenciled with the suffrage state names, and one of them even had a sign saying Nebraska Next. Unfortunately, one of the young ladies during the parade took ill. I think it was the heat. This was July. And they asked if Grace would take her place on the float. And so there's Grace afterwards holding the Nebraska next sign. And you can see her with the umbrella, looking a little hot, but still looking very nice. And at first, her granddaughter thought that maybe the dress in this image was the wedding dress. Unfortunately, I've really looked at it, and darn it, it's not. But Nene did tell me that there was another parade. There's no documentation that she was pretty sure she did wear the dress, but that's not it, unfortunately. So unbeknownst to her, behind this touring car that she was sitting in, there was a car filled with Negro women, and they were traveling behind the float. And Nene was explaining to me what a big heart that Grace Crandall Richardson had, and I already had known that from reading her scrapbooks, that she is not a racist woman, and she was very affronted that they put these women in this float as if. And then, unfortunately, behind the women, they had, this young man in blackface, as if he's the coach driver. And Grace took great offense at this. She said, this is not correct. This is not how you do things. She even noted that some of her own friends thought that she was queer as an odd. And they were kind of divided. Are we going to stay a friend of you or not? So, despite some very valiant efforts, the petition proposal of 1915 is going to fail. Even Teddy Roosevelt, former President Teddy Roosevelt showing up, even Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan, even the next to be Omaha Mayor Edward Smith giving these women support. Nothing made any kind of a difference. So they lost. It was a really slim percent. It was about 5% margin. So part of the reason why the suffragists lost was Nebraska's 19th century population consisted of about 20% German Americans. And the state's powerful German American Alliance organization had declared suffrage as degrading, and it was a threat to their home. They basically spoke for the German American women, and they said, if you give our women the vote, you're going to put them in an unsavory political arena. Now, back against the background of this going on, now we're flipping into like 1916. We've already got World War I going. It's been going since 1914. And of course, there's this question, is America are we going to join in or not? You've got the German American Alliance organization. And they are pushing very heavily in Nebraska not to let women have the vote. So America is going to join in to World War I in April of 1917, and all of a sudden you get this instant resentment towards German Americans. I've interviewed people who, mentioned that their grandparents, they were being beaten up in school. People are not being very polite to them. Where's your allegiance? Those kind of questions. And so the Nebraska suffragists, they're a little worried because here they are seen as agitators. Here's the German American Club saying this is wrong, this is politically unsavory, and they don't want to be seen as, troublemakers. And so they make a point. They do their part. They sew, they knit, they roll Red Cross bandages for the boys over there. And Katie Sumney and Grace Richardson, they will serve as chairman and vice chairman of the Omaha Food Drive. And Richardson laughingly said afterwards about her experience of doing this food drive, she said, well, through Mr. Hoover, we stopped the dumping of good vegetables into the Missouri River late at night. So that was, their do-good session here. Eventually, though, the German American Alliance, which really is giving the suffragists a great deal of trouble, they are going to be a little concerned. There is a law on the books. It's called the Mocket Law. And this Mocket Law basically said that it was okay to teach foreign languages in the public schools, including German. And so this is going to basically pressure a legislative deal. The suffragists have been trying to get the vote through since 1855, 1856 technically when they put it to a vote. And now all of a sudden, it looks like maybe they're on the brink of something. What happened is that the Nebraskan German-American senators, who were actually the loudest proponents of suffragists, they made a deal, a very quiet deal, with 6 pro-suffrage legislators, basically for the promise of not opposing the repeal of the market law. The 6 who said, no way in heck are we ever going to have suffrage, they basically said, okay, we're going to vote on it. You can have suffrage. So unbelievably, after this 48,000 plus petition being signed, these women standing out in the blizzards trying to convince people, all it took were some men, having this conversation and just saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. So, because of that, on April 21st, 1917, Nebraska women earned the right to limited voting. And in case you're wondering what that would mean, it just means that you can vote like in a municipal election, you could vote in a presidential election, but all state offices you cannot do anything. So it's kind of gutless in a way. The suffragists were okay, it was better than nothing. Unfortunately, the anti-suffragists were incensed, and they decided that they were going to create their own petition. And so, unbelievably, in 3 months' time, which seems like a very short time, and people were already raising their eyebrows about this, they managed to get 30,000 signatures on a referendum petition. So you have the initiative petition, and then the repeal is the referendum petition. So this petition, unfortunately, because they presented it, it looked legitimate, automatically stopped the partial suffrage voting for the women. It even froze it from 1917 to 1919. So unfortunately, about this time, you're going to see these cards that are in bright suffrage yellow that are basically saying, what are we going to do? We worked so hard. Yes, there was a business transaction, and fine, we got the partial voting. Now, all of a sudden, they're being told it's frozen. You can't do it. So they had it for like a few months, 3 months, and then they were just told, that's it, you're done. So, unfortunately, Richardson, who was very upset about this, is going to say, well, we're going to respond to this. She is going to create her suffrage album that she calls The Case. Again, this album is the biggest one of the 4 scrapbooks that she put together, and she has everything in this album. She actually has, this is a copy of the court case. It's about this thick, and she even has the votes, you can pull it out, and she's got every senator who was doing what. This was pretty intense work that she did, very persistent. So this is going to, as she put it, she said the case is going to be against the strongest machine of the state. I don't know if anybody kind of knows where I'm going with this, besides the fact that she's working with the companies, with the liquor interests that are against her. She's also working against the Omaha boss, Tom Dennison, and so she realizes that she's up against some pretty tough folks. Obviously, she's not doing this by herself, and Grace does a very nice job in the albums. Please don't think it's all about her. It's not. She does a very nice job of explaining of all of the suffragists who are assisting and what they're doing. Anyway, the case is going to become the most celebrated Nebraska court case in state history at this point. So what is the case? Well, Nebraska Women's Suffrage Association president Edna Barkley, who used to be the former dean of women at University of Nebraska at Lincoln, she is going to take on the staunch Democrat Nebraskan State or Secretary of State Charles Poole. And that may not seem like a big deal, except this is going to be our first Democrat who's going to be serving as the Secretary of State. We had a lot of Republicans, yes, we're still a red state, but we have a lot of Republicans who've been pushing the territorial capital since 1854, and you have your first Democrat. So Charles Poole feels like he has something to prove. The court case, Barkley versus Poole, will include a total of 18 suffragist plaintiff interveners. That's what you call the people who have brought this case. They're the plaintiffs. And, of course, one of them was Grace Richardson. Now, initially, Poole is kind of pulling a fast one. He tells the 18 interveners, sorry, you cannot examine the referendum petition. Then after they are upset and they basically get in his office one too many times, he says, fine, you can have a copy of it, but you have to pay. So they raise the money. They raise a lot of money, actually. They raise thousands of dollars because they say this is what it's going to take to get us the vote in Nebraska. The last thing is Poole says, well, I'll go ahead and I'll have a copy made, but I get to pick the clerks. So, of course, he picks the most incompetent clerks who can't get it right, and then they have to pay for it and pay for it again. Finally, they get a copy of this petition, and it becomes very apparent that there's something wrong with the petition. First of all, an organization named the Prosperity League, which happens to be the same Nebraska organization that campaigned against Prohibition, and you have to remember, Prohibition in Nebraska took place a lot earlier than the 18th Amendment. We already had it here in May of 1917. So they're the same people who are organizing this referendum. So right there is kind of a red flag. And then it appears that a total of over 16,000 of these 32,000 people who supposedly signed this petition, it looked like at least 10,000 were possibly forged. So the first thing Grace Richardson noticed was that there were entire pages in the same handwriting of people in alphabetical order, and she said, I think there's something wrong with this. Okay, so yeah, she understands right away, and she's being helped by Katie Sumney, but she understands right away something's not right here. So she duly notes in scrapbook number 3, the case, that the Omaha crime boss, Tom Dennison, oddly enough, it was some of his employees, and she can prove it, who were gathering some of the unlawful signatures. So she's going to go ahead and get a battery of lawyers. She's not the only one. Mrs. Draper-Smith is helping quite a bit. She's the president of the Nebraska Women's Suffrage Association. They get a battery of lawyers together, and their chief lawyer is a man by the name of C.A. Sorensen. And Sorensen, he's working pro bono. So are the other attorneys. He is going to start issuing subpoenas, and so this is turning into kind of rough, political, unsavory arena that they were trying to keep the women out of in the first place. But Grace basically says we can handle it. So it was her idea, and I've got a picture here of something that looks like a bad recipe kind of catalog, but it's her alphabetical card catalog, and she created it of 18,000 Douglas County petition signatures. So she takes the 32,000 plus signature petition, and she weeds out 16,000 names. She can tell, who's Douglas County, where you're living. And then, so clever, she checks the names of these people against a list of registered Omaha voters. Now, due to the volume of witnesses, they're going to need about 80 subpoenas a day, because a lot of the witnesses who are really dead or don't exist, of course, are not coming forward. So C.A. Sorensen is churning out these subpoenas, and Richardson and Sumney realize, what if maybe one day or 2 days or something, all of these 80 men show up? So they ask the court for a larger room. And oddly enough, they're given juvenile court. So here they are writing these letters to these witnesses saying, okay, here's your subpoena. You need to appear in court. I'm not really sure if you exist or not, but we need to make sure. And it says appear in juvenile court. So a lot of these men came, and they brought their wives. And their wives were sure their men were in some kind of indiscretion. Like, juvenile court? It's a child? What is going on here? So a lot of these men are like looking at the floor like this as they're coming in, not knowing, okay, why am I So anyway, Richard's filing system, which as she put it, she had a filing card mind, is going to cleverly tally not only the witnesses, and I wish I could have gotten in here. I guess I could have undone it, but I didn't want to because it was all still from back in the day with the strings around it. She tallies the witness. She put their interview date. She put the petition signature number that was on this huge petition, the referendum. She put the page of their typed testimony, which of course she's typing up, and she put a summary of the testimony on top of it on the back of the card. Okay, I don't know. I'm in awe of this woman. So the attorney, F.A. Brogan, he complimented Nebraska, as he put it, Nebraska's persistent suffragist, because she kept the investigation costs to just a little over $5,000, which at the end of this mess is actually going to earn the suffragists, they get a refund, which is incredible. So according to Brogan, who noted as a lawyer that he knew something about preparing lawsuits, he said Richardson's capacity for work was of a very high order, and it would have been worth many thousands of dollars had she been a paid assistant. So, today Richardson, her handiwork, it remains in these really long, narrow boxes. It looks like the Dewey Decimal System, and they're sitting at the History Nebraska archives. So after they were all done with this, they had everything tallied, then Richardson and Sumney were actually subpoenaed, and they had to give an official testimony of what they saw. And they both signed it, and Richardson said, I was so glad that we got this official. They attested to checking 18,842 names, and they said of those names, 11,000 were forgeries. They said that the names appeared in duplicate, some in triplicate, and some of the names of the men, they had died years before signing the petition. It amused Sumney and Richardson that in certain sections of Omaha, according to the petition, the residents seemed to have adopted an alphabetical housing pattern. Yeah, it was very obvious, but still, they had to prove this. So a confident Richard noted, "We have 6,000 pages of evidence." This was when they were all said and done. She said, "It is the biggest case ever fought in Nebraska courts, and I am sure we're going to win." So Nebraska Supreme Court will indeed rule in the favor of the 18 intervener suffragists. But much more important, and the suffragists were actually very happy to contribute this, the Nebraska Supreme Court ruled that future petition requirements, because they really didn't have any, they had to go to a set standard. And unbelievably, even today, if you get on the internet and you look at petition initiative, if anybody's ever done these before, the initiative and referendum petitions have to follow certain guidelines, and they take great delight in noting that, this was way back when this was settled. So now Nebraska women, they can go ahead and they can vote in any local, state, or presidential election. The anti-suffragists, because, and at least to Grace's credit, they did prove that very few women anti-suffragists were actually part of the referendum petition. They proved that this was almost all men of the Prosperity League. They said it really wasn't them. They actually were very nice to their sisters. They were, though, ordered to pay all court costs for this petition, and it totaled several $1,000s, so they were on the hook for that. The suffragists celebrated by using a portion of their $1,120 refund to purchase a painting of Nassau, the National American Woman Suffrage Association president, that's the national president, Carrie Chapman. They went ahead, or Carrie Chapman Catt, they went ahead and published a painting, or purchased a painting of her, and they put it in the Omaha Public Library. So they said, that's what we do with the money. Well, some of it. Lauded as the women who made suffrage victorious in Nebraska, Richardson, Smith, and Sumney were the first women to register to vote at City Hall. It was pretty funny when they got in there. They told the women, well, we can't just register you. You have no identification, so we need to ask your weight, unbelievable. Yeah, your weight, your age, and your height. And Draper Smith had quite the sense of humor, and she said, well, I'm fat, and I'm old, and I'm stout. Get over it. So, because the anti-suffragists said no woman is ever going to give her real age and weight and height, but they all stood there and very proudly said what it was, nice and loud. So here they are. This picture was actually in the Omaha Daily Bee, and they were really pleased because the women reporters were very kind to them, and they made a great show of saying the big three suffragists, because some of the newspapers, just to be rude, they would call them suffragettes. And of course, a suffragette is a British woman fighting for the vote, and a suffragist is an American woman fighting for the vote. So they were pretty tickled that these women reporters knew what they were talking about. So the Nebraska will officially become the 14th state to ratify the 19th Amendment on August 2nd, 1919. Nebraska Governor Samuel McKelvey signed the state's approval with a stroke of his wooden pen, which I believe in the exhibit upstairs, we actually have the wooden pen. So it's really amazing. If you get a chance, look at the pen, because back in the day, you didn't have, the internet or some kind of captioning. So they just wrote it on the pen, the whole thing. Why was this pen so important? So please look carefully at the pen. So they're pretty excited about this. Richardson, she noted in her Forss scrapbook, and she did this very deliberately, she noted that the mayor, because now he was mayor, Edward Parson Smith and his wife Margaret, who was an ardent suffragist, they barely had time to celebrate this victory. What happened was, here we are, August, and then at the end of September in Omaha, all heck is going to break loose because there is a lynch mob. And Edward Smith tried to stop the lynching of Will Brown, and he almost, they had a rope around his neck. They almost lynched him, and he ended up recovering for weeks after this. So I thought it was very interesting that Grace Richardson, she has this scrapbook page, and then she took another sheet of paper. She must have kind of thought it through, and she stapled a half sheet on top of the other sheet because it was so important. She wanted it to stand out. She praised on this half sheet, she praised the mayor for being, how did she put it, bravery in defense of law and order. He was most heroic. And she put at the rest of the sheet, she said, most likely this lynching was the orchestration of Tom Dennison and the previous mayor, and he will be the mayor after Smith completely has had it with politics because of almost being lynched, Mayor Jim Dahlman. I thought it was really interesting that she went out of her way to put this in the scrapbook until I realized that maybe her interest in this grisly lynching of William Brown wasn't just a casual notation. Her brother Harry, he was an old school chum of Jim Dahlman's son-in-law. He actually served as the best man at the wedding and was involved with the Dahlman family. So she really doesn't talk about Harry much, but I thought that was very interesting how he's mentioned a tiny bit in the scrapbook, and that was it. Her sister Laura, her younger sister, she was a suffragist with Grace. At the end of her scrapbook, she had this lovely picture of Laura. She goes on and on about Laura. There's nothing about Harry. So, prior to the 19th Amendment becoming part of the U.S. Constitution, on the day before what would have been the 100th anniversary of Susan B. Anthony's birthday, the National American Women's Suffrage Association held its very last convention. And if you look at this program, it's kind of an interesting program. At the top it says, the Nassau, and then it says Congress of the League of Women Voters, because it's a double occasion. Not only is it the last suffrage meeting of Nassau, but it's the first of the League of Women Voters, and this is in Chicago, Illinois. So on February 14th, 1920, the Nassau president, Carrie Chapman Catt, proposed that the newly invented Nassau, coming out of the League of Women Voters, now they go ahead and they should finish women's fight, and they should assist the nation's suffrage reconstruction. They basically said there was a lot of hard feelings. There were anti-suffragists, there were suffragists. It's kind of like after the Civil War. They said we need to put ourselves back together again, and the League of Women Voters are just the people to do the job. Suffragists Sumney, Draper Smith, and Richardson, among a lot of others, were awarded a Nassau Honor Roll certificate for their dedication. Richardson highly prized this. She actually framed it in the scrapbook, which I thought was pretty impressive. Convention participants loudly celebrated their victory at last, national accomplishment. I can't even imagine these women dressed in dresses like this, but they were standing on their chairs, they were singing, they were yelling, they were parading around the Chicago Convention Hall, and there is Grace Richardson, this tiny little woman, standing out in a shell pink evening gown. You could see her, among all this white and, yeah. So there she is, and she's holding an artificial flower corsage, and there it is, and she, again, was so excited about this corsage. This is also upstairs in the exhibit. That she donated it to History Nebraska, and she has a little yellow horn as well. And there it is. She's blowing into her little yellow horn, and if you look really closely on the inside, I mean, this woman is so meticulous. She put National Suffrage Convention, Chicago, and she put February 1920. She brought it with her, and so there she is blowing into this horn. So, unfortunately, after all was said and done, Grace said that she felt a little emotional because the suffrage fight was over. I mean, her days of activism, she thought, were over. Her husband, by this point, was very ill. He had tuberculosis, and before she could even vote in November of 1920, she and her husband moved to Monrovia, California. They had sanitariums there. That's what you did if you had tuberculosis. For the sunshine, you left. So, her suffragist sisters were very sad that she wouldn't be voting with them, but James was just too ill for them to wait. Besides, she recalled later on, we knew little about Cox and cared nothing for Harding. So she wasn't too broken up that she wasn't voting. Upon arrival in California, Richardson became the chair of the Public Affairs of Women's Club. So she doesn't stop. She spent the next couple of decades tending to her terminally ill husband, who passed away in 1930. She made speeches to various groups of Republican women on Christmas seals, and she completed her unpublished autobiography, which much of it was taken directly from the scrapbooks. The persistent Nebraska suffragist died on January 9th, 1963. And there she is at the very end of her life. Nini, her granddaughter, gave me this image. It's kind of not very clear, but you can kind of get a glimpse of her, much older. But the thing that really astounded me was that Nini was telling me that the ring, Grace, I was surprised Nini used this word, her granddaughter. She said Grace hated that ring. She despised that ring because I think it was everything that she was not. She was a very simple woman, a very humble woman, and her husband's family to be looking down on her wedding day, that didn't help. But there was one moment where Grace Richardson's sister-in-law, this is James's sister, youngest sister, Hadley, came to Grace and said, I want to get married. My husband is a starving writer. We have no money. Can I take your ring? Do you mind? It's just sitting in the box. It's not doing anybody any good. And Grace said, sure, I don't care. Take it. Do whatever you want with it. The ring on the inside actually said, Grace and James, 1902. I mean, it's very sweet, but she really hated that ring. So her sister-in-law went ahead and took it to her fiance, and the morning that Hadley married Ernest Hemingway, she was wearing the diamond. So today, I know, I couldn't believe that. Unfortunately, if you know Ernest Hemingway, he went through 4 wives. So it wasn't the guy. I don't know, the ring was bad luck. But, so anyway, so after Hadley divorced Ernest Hemingway after a few years of marriage, she did give back the ring to Grace. And of course, Grace said, I don't care, and stuck it back in the box. But in her will, Nini, her granddaughter, was very surprised to find a sheet of paper, and it was handwritten by Grace. And it said, I bequeath the wedding ring to Nini. So today, Nini went ahead and took a picture because Nini has been wearing Grace's wedding ring since 1963. That's a picture of Nini's hand. Nini, again, is in her late 80s. And notice below it, she has 3 bands. One is her 15th, one is her 10th, and one of her 15th, 20th, and 25th anniversary bands from her husband, who very happy marriage. And above it is that giant diamond ring, the 2-carat ring. So she said, I'm not taking it off to take the picture. You know, I don't know if it will even come off. But she said, I'll send you a picture of the ring. So there it is. So much for being persistent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Did anyone have any questions? I went through that fairly fast.
So in her autobiography, she doesn't talk about after her parents died. I mean, like, who took care of them, all that?
I don't know. I mean, it was so odd. I'm imagining, because Grace was the eldest, that it was her, and that's why she didn't graduate from high school until she was 22. She was extremely close to Laura. I don't think I mentioned it, but Laura lived with them when she was first married for quite some time, until she was old enough. She was about 15 at the time that Grace got married, and just said, you know, you're my family, and that's how it goes. So, yeah, I know. I wish there had been something there about her parents, but there was not.
Is there a place publicly to see the names of the people who signed the women, or people who signed for women to get the vote, and those who didn't, who ran that petition? Is there a
Good question. Yeah, actually there is. The petition, they have it at the archives, and thanks to Grace with her long boxes, every person's name is in there. They even said that William Jennings Bryan had signed it, and that his address, Grace actually went to the address, and it was like the middle of a street, like an alley, and they're like, really? William Jennings Bryan lived here? So yeah, they do have that, thanks to her. It's a little harder to look at, though, with the system like she has it. Anybody else? Go ahead.
You mentioned that she met Jeanette Rankin. Did she meet Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton?
That would have been awesome, but yeah, Susie B., she died in 1902, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, 1906. She was born in 1877, but no. As far as I know, you know, Susie B., when she was here, it was 1871. She went down to Nebraska City, and that's how we know for sure she was here. I don't know why. She had a portrait taken, and then Nebraska City newspapers said some really mean things about Susan B. Anthony and how ugly she was. So I don't think she really, after that, came back. Elizabeth Cady Stanton did come to Nebraska and try to, she helped the women in Hebron in Nebraska to put together the Nebraska Women's Suffrage Association, but Grace would have been still back in Minnesota. Good question, though. Yes?
You mentioned that that there were African American women in the parade in Blair.
Mm-hmm.
Did you run across, was there a picture of them, or did she just say that they were there? And did you run across any other examples of African American Nebraska women being active?
Really, really good question. You know, Grace, for being as culturally diverse aware as she was, there were no images of any, I mean, there were black suffragists for sure, but that that parade, no one had taken a picture. So unfortunately, in her scrapbooks, and I'm kind of just focusing there, even though I know that darn well there were black suffragists, she did not mention working with any, which I thought was kind of surprising. All right, well, you've been awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You.